Welcome back to the show. Today we're breaking down one of the most overused, outdated, and misleading numbers in women's health: body mass index, BMI. For decades, women have been told that this single ratio of height and weight determines whether they're healthy, overweight, or at risk. But here's the truth: BMI doesn't measure fat. It doesn't measure muscle. It doesn't measure inflammation, hormonal shifts, or metabolic health. And for mid women, especially those navigating perimenopause and menopause, BMI becomes even more inaccurate because your body composition is changing, even when the scale isn't. So today we're talking about the metric that actually matters: body fat percentage, what it tells you, why it's more accurate, and how it can finally give you clarity about your health instead of confusion and shame. Let's get into it. Before we go any further in this discussion, let's establish what exactly BMI measures compared to body fat percentage. BMI is just weight divided by height. That's it. No composition, no distinction. Body fat percentage measures how much of the total body weight is fat mass versus lean mass, which is like your muscles, bones, organs, and water. So in other words, BMI is just a rough estimate based on height and weight, and body fat percentage is a direct measurement of your actual composition. BMI is everywhere in the modern healthcare, but most people don't realize it was never designed to judge individuals' health. It started as a 19th century mathematical tool meant to describe population trends. Not women, not athletes, and definitely not the diverse bodies that we see today. Over time, insurance companies and later the medical field adopted it because it was simple, not because it was accurate. So, BMI that we use today is really a product of old statistical models, corporate risk calculation, and broad disease pattern data, not a true reflection of your personal health or body composition. Now, listen to this. BMI was not even created by a physician, physiologist, or a medical researcher. It was developed in the late 1830s by Lambert Cretel, a Bulgarian astronomer and mathematician. Then in the 1900s to the 1950s, the insurance company considered that the ideal BMI to be based solely on weight that is associated with the lowest mortality weights of their policyholders. Now, get this: in 1998, the World Health Organization, WHO, established standardized BMI classifications for overweight and obese adults based on the risk of obesity-related disease observed in European males. I am not a fan of BMI. It can be helpful in some instances. First, we need to realize that BMI was designed to look at large groups, not individuals. And in that context, it still works. Across big populations, higher BMI categories often correlate with higher rates of chronic disease. So, for public health researchers, it is a fast way to spot trends. Secondly, it's easy to calculate. No equipment, no lab work, no scans, just height and weight. And that simplicity is why it's still used in primary care, even though it shouldn't be the only metric. It should be more of a prompt, not a verdict. Lastly, it helps track population level changes over time. For researchers that are studying obesity trends, health disparities, or national health patterns, BMI is a practical tool because it's a standardized and widely way to collect information. So it's great for researchers in identifying potential chronic health risks, but other than that, So don't get too upset when your doctor notes in your record that you're overweight or obese. It's just a clinical marker. Now, Let me share why this metric is so flawed and does not tell the whole story. BMI is basically a height to weight ratio math problem that treats the human body as a flat two-dimensional shape. When you have a simplified, living, dynamic body down to a basic formula, you're guaranteed to introduce errors, especially for women, athletes, or anyone who doesn't fit that narrow model. First, let's start with body composition. Body composition is the breakdown of what our body is actually made of. It shows how much fat mass we have compared to how much lean mass we have, such as the muscles, the bones, the organs, and water. Two women can weigh the same exact weight and have two completely different levels of strength, metabolic health, and risk, all because their composition is different. Unfortunately, BMI can't distinguish between fat-free mass, which is skeleton mass, bone density, connective tissue, and edible tissue, which is fat mass. As a result, highly trained athletes, strength competitors, or anyone with a lot of muscle gets pushed to that overweight or obese BMI category, even when their body fat percentage is extremely low. Their weight is coming from muscle, not fat. But BMI can't tell the difference. Now, on the opposite spectrum, we have the skinny fat phenomenon. Skinny fat describes someone who appears lean and has a normal BMI, but carries excess body fat and low muscle mass, a body composition pattern that increases metabolic risk even when they look healthy. This is clinically known as normal weight obesity or metabolically obese normal weight. Women with normal weight obesity typically have high visceral fat around the organs, low muscle mass, low visible muscle tone, and stable scale weight but increasing waist circumference. People who are sedentary, adults losing muscle with age, and women navigating postmenopause often show up having a normal BMI but carrying high levels of visceral fat and little lean mass. On the outside, the scale looks fine, but internally, the body is shifting to more abdominal fat, less muscle, which dramatically increases metabolic risk. BMI simply can't see any of that. Now, the last gap that I want to highlight is demographic biases. One of the biggest problems with BMI is that it was never designed with real human diversity in mind across race, ethnicity, sex, age, or hormonal statuses. Let's remember, it was created for European adult men. Because of that, BMI systematically misclassifies entire groups of people. Different ethnic groups carry fat differently. The Asian population tends to have higher visceral fat at lower BMIs, meaning they may face a higher metabolic risk even when BMI looks normal. Now, the Black population often has higher bone density and more lean mass, which can push BMI up even further to when the body fat is low. Hispanic or indigenous populations store more visceral fat, increasing cardiometabolic risk at BMIs that appear average. So now let's get into why looking at actual body fat percentage is a more accurate way to measure body composition. BMI is an external mathematical formula that treats every pound of the body mass the same, regardless to where it comes from. Body fat percentage does the opposite. It breaks down mass into two actual components. From an exercise science and metabolic health perspective, body composition is far more accurate because it tells you what your weight is made of: muscle, fat, bone, water. It measures the tissue's quality, not just the total volume, which is why it gives us a further clearer picture of real health. Body fat percentage uses a two compartment model. Instead of treating all weight the same, it separates it into total body mass into two meaningful categories. First, we have the fat mass. This includes essential fat, the kind that our hormones, brain, and organs need to function. The storage fat, which includes subcutaneous fat and deeper visceral fat around the organ. The second category, we have fat-free mass, which is everything else that makes us strong. Our skeleton muscle, our bone material content, organs, connective tissue, and water. Breaking down the body in this way actually shows our physiological makeup. BMI can't do that. It only measures how hard gravity pulls on the body as a whole. One number, no context, no insight. Body composition gives us the truth. One of the biggest failures of BMI shows up in people with well-developed muscle mass, like athletes, bodybuilders, or anyone who trains consistently. Muscle is far denser than body fat, which means it takes up less space. Muscle does not weigh more than fat. Let's stop saying that. Because BMI doesn't account for tissue density or composition, someone with high lean mass and low body fat is often labeled as overweight or even obese. Their weight comes from muscle, not excess fat. But BMI can't tell you the difference. Lastly, the opposite error that BMI makes is just as risky. It involves when someone is called healthy or has a normal weight, even though their body fat percentage is high. Remember skinny fat? As people age and when they're not doing resistance training, they're naturally going to lose skeleton muscle mass while gaining more body fat. The scale may not change and the BMI may stay the same, but internally the body is shifting. There's less lean mass, there's more visceral fat, there's a higher metabolic risk. But BMI can't see any of this. Body composition can. So, I have just given you a lot of information about BMI versus body fat percentage. And I know what you're saying. Okay, Dr. Butler, what does this have to do with the menopausal stages? Well, let me share why it matters. Once we enter the menopausal stages, this is the moment when a woman's physiological shift starts to happen in a way that BMI just cannot capture. This is the stage where the body composition tells the real story, not the scale defining who we are with a weight height formula from the 1800s. As estrogen declines, the body naturally shifts towards more visceral fat around the abdominal, less lean muscle mass, increased insulin resistance, and higher inflammation. These changes can happen even if the weight stays the same. BMI tells a midlife woman you're fine. Body fat percentage shows the truth. More fat, less muscles, higher metabolic risk. Midlife is when sarcopenia, the age-related muscle loss, speeds up. Without resistance training and adequate protein, women can lose strength, metabolic rate, and bone protective lean mass. Visceral fat is deep abdominal fat that wraps around the organs and it drives insulin resistance, higher blood pressure, higher triglycerides, which is our cholesterol levels, and cardiometabolic disease. A woman can have a normal BMI and still can carry a dangerous amount of high visceral fat. This is why so many women in midlife say, the weight is the same on the scale, but my body feels completely different. BMI cannot detect this shift. Body fat percentage and waist circumference can. During the menopausal stages, BMI is notorious for labeling muscular women as overweight, labeling women with high visceral fat as healthy, missing sarcopenia entirely in ignoring hormonal shifts that changes with fat distribution. This is why so many women feel unseen or dismissed in healthcare settings. Body fat percentage, on the other hand, reflects hormonal changes, muscle loss, fat redistribution, and metabolic risk. It tells a story that BMI cannot. That's our deep dive into why BMI has been misleading us for decades and why body fat percentage finally gives us the clarity we deserve. If there's one thing I want you to walk away with today, it's this. Your health is not a single number. You are not defined by a chart, a category, or a formula that was created in the 1800s by a mathematician who never studied women's physiology. Your body is dynamic, it's intelligent, it's consistently adapting to hormones, stress, aging, training, and life. When you understand what's actually happening beneath the surface, your muscle mass, your visceral fat, your metabolic health, you can make decisions that support your strength, longevity, and your confidence. So, if you've ever felt confused, discouraged, or dismissed because of a BMI label, I hope this episode reminds you you're not the problem, the metric is. And you deserve tools that honors the complexity of your body, especially in midlife. Keep lifting, keep nourishing yourself, keep asking questions, keep advocating for your health with the same power and resilience that got you here today. Thank you for spending time with me. If this episode spoke to you, share it with another woman who needs to hear it. And don't forget to like and comment. As always, stay strong, stay informed, stay in your power, and I will see you in the next episode.